January 27, 1945. A prisoner of war camp in Germany. Frozen ground, pre-dawn dark. More than 1,200 American soldiers standing outside in the cold. The German commandant walked up to Master Sergeant Roddie Edmonds and pressed a pistol against his forehead. He had a simple demand: identify the Jewish soldiers in your formation. Point them out. Step aside. Edmonds had already seen what happened to Jewish prisoners when they were separated. He knew exactly where they went. He looked at the commandant, and he made a decision that could get him, and every man standing behind him, killed. What he said next, what he risked, what happened when that pistol went up. That's this story, and somehow almost no one knows it. Go back 6 weeks. December 16, 1944. Roddie Edmonds was a master sergeant with the 422nd Infantry Regiment, part of the 106th Infantry Division. He was from South Knoxville, Tennessee. Grew up during the Depression. Enlisted in 1941 before Pearl Harbor. By the winter of 1944, he had been in the Army 3 years, and his division had been in Europe for exactly 5 days. 5 days. Most of the men around him had never heard a shot fired in combat. They were green, cold, and holding a forward position in the Ardennes forest that Allied commanders had decided was quiet, safe, a good place for a new division to ease in. They were wrong. On December 16th, Germany launched a massive surprise offensive. 200,000 troops, 1,000 tanks. The Battle of the Bulge. The 422nd Regiment was cut off within hours. Surrounded, no way out, no relief coming. They held for 3 days in those frozen woods before they had nothing left. On December 19th, the regiment surrendered. Edmonds wrote one line in his diary that day: "We were humiliated. That was all." The march to the railhead was 50 kilometers through the snow. Anyone who fell behind was shot on the spot. At the station, the Germans loaded them into cattle cars, 60-70 men per car. No food, no water, no room to sit. They stood packed together for 7 days and nights. At one point, the train stopped in the Limburg rail yard. During the night, British bombers hit the yard. The Germans had already left. The men were locked inside unmarked cars with no way out. Edmonds wrote in his diary that hearing those bombs fall, not knowing if each one was the last thing he'd ever hear, was the worst experience of his life. Several hundred Americans died that night, including their chaplain. The survivors reached Stalag IB near the town of Bad Orb on Christmas Day. The camp was brutal. 1 thin bowl of broth a day. Black bread cut with sawdust. Men were getting sick and weak fast. But Edmonds noticed something beyond the hunger. The Germans were pulling Jewish soldiers out. Not officers. The lower-ranking Jewish enlisted men. Men from other units who had arrived before. Edmonds' group were being identified, separated from the general population, loaded onto trucks, and driven away. Edmonds watched it happen. He asked questions. He got no straight answers, but he understood what the silence meant. At Bad Orb, Jewish American prisoners who were separated didn't come back. Most of them were sent to slave labor camps. Many of them died there. He recorded that in his diary. He didn't write much else about it, but he didn't forget it either. After a month at Bad Orb, the Germans split the prisoners into groups. Edmonds and the other non-commissioned officers, 1,275 men, were transferred to a second camp, Stalag IXA, near the town of Ziegenhain. Roddie Edmonds was the highest-ranking NCO among them. Every one of those 275 men was now his responsibility. What he didn't know yet was that the Germans weren't finished separating Jews. They arrived at Stalag LA on January 25th. The welcome was designed to make a point. A Russian prisoner, young, starving, was brought to the front of the camp. The guards set dogs on him while the newly arrived Americans were forced to watch. Anyone who looked away got a rifle in the head. This will happen to any one of you who does not do exactly as we say. That was the introduction to their new home. That night, after the men were locked in the barracks, the German intercom came on. The order was brief. The following morning, after roll call, only the Jewish prisoners were to step forward and fall out. Just the Jews. No one else. Anyone who disobeyed would be shot. The intercom clicked off. Nobody spoke. Paul Stern, a Jewish soldier from New York who had quietly studied German in college and never told the Germans, sat completely still. He understood every word of what he'd heard. He had been at Bad Orb. He had watched what happened to Jewish men after they were separated. He knew where they went. Lester Tanner, another Jewish soldier, had served under Edmonds since training back home. He had been with this man for over a year. He knew how Edmonds led, steady, unflashy, completely reliable. He had watched him hold the regiment together during the Bulge. He had marched beside him through the snow. Now he sat in that barracks and waited, because the question in that room, the question nobody was saying out loud, was whether their sergeant was going to let the Germans have the Jewish soldiers in the morning. Edmonds didn't say much that night, but he had already seen what separation meant. He wasn't going to let it happen again. January 27th, still dark. Edmonds moved through the barracks before the wake-up call. He didn't make a speech. He didn't explain his reasoning. He didn't ask for a show of hands. He was the senior man in the camp, and he gave an order. Every American soldier in Stalag Annexe was falling out for morning roll call. Not just the Jewish men, all of them. Think about what that meant. The Germans had issued an explicit order. Jewish prisoners only. Anyone who disobeyed would be shot. Edmonds was now ordering over 1,000 men to disobey it, and he was putting himself at the front of that formation where the Germans would see him first. The men got up. They went outside. They formed up in the frozen dark. 275 Americans standing in the snow, waiting. What Edmonds did next would determine whether the Jewish men in that formation, over 200 of them, walked out of that camp alive. Major Siegman, the camp commandant, came out to take roll call. He stopped when he saw the formation, all of them. Every American in the camp, standing together in the cold. He looked at the rows of men. Then he walked straight to Edmonds. "They cannot all be Jews," he said. Edmonds looked at him and didn't blink. "We are all Jews here." Siegman went still. Then everything happened fast. He stepped right up to Edmonds, close, inches away, and drew his pistol. He put the barrel against Edmonds' forehead. Paul Stern was standing near enough to hear every word. He would say, 70 years later, that he could still hear it like it happened yesterday. Lester Tanner was standing right beside Edmonds. He said afterward that his sergeant was completely calm, not forcing it, not performing it, actually calm. The kind of calm that comes from a man who made up his mind the night before and has nothing left to decide. The pistol didn't move. "Sergeant," Siegman said, "one last chance. You will order the Jews to step forward, or I will shoot you right now." Formation behind Edmonds didn't move. Over 1,200 men standing in the snow, watching. Edmonds answered, "If you are going to shoot, you are going to have to shoot all of us." He wasn't done. "Because we know who you are. And when we win this war, you will be tried for war crimes, and you will pay." The camp was completely silent. Siegman stared at him. The pistol was still there, pressed against his head. Edmonds didn't step back, didn't look away. Didn't give him anything. The formation didn't move. 1,200 men, watching, waiting, not one of them breaking. Siegmund went white. He started to shake. Then he lowered the gun. He turned around and walked away without a word. Nobody spoke. Edmonds turned to the formation and gave the order to return to barracks. 1,275 men went back inside. 200 Jewish American soldiers walked with them, unidentified, unseparated, alive. The men of Stalag WWII were liberated on March 30th, 1945. 100 days as prisoners. Roddie Edmonds went home to Knoxville. He served in the Korean War, came back, worked at the local paper, sold cable and mobile homes, went to church, raised 2 sons, Kim and Chris. He never talked about the war. Not the Bulge, not the march, not the cattle cars, not the bombs in the Limburg rail yard, not January 27th. When anyone asked, he gave them the same answer. We were humiliated. That was it. He kept a diary from those months. When his son Chris found it after Edmonds died in August 1985, he expected to find the story of Stalag WWII inside. Some account of the confrontation, something about the pistol, or the formation, or the Jewish soldiers who stayed with their unit. What he found instead was names and addresses, page after page. The name and home address of every man Roddie Edmonds had been responsible for at Stalag WWII, written out carefully, one by one. Nothing about January 27th, not one word. Chris Edmonds started tracking down those names. A 2008 New York Times article led him to Lester Tanner. By then a prominent attorney in New York, 95 years old and still sharp. Tanner had been waiting for someone to ask. He told Chris everything: the cold that morning, the formation, the pistol against his father's head, the silence before Edmonds answered. Roddie could no more have turned over any of his men to the Nazis. Tanner said, then he could stop breathing. Chris found Paul Stern, still alive, still remembered every word. That critical confrontation occurred in a few short moments. Stern said, yet it remained vivid in my mind these many years. I blessed Sergeant Edmonds for his heroic act of courage. He found others, Sidney Friedman, Sonny Fox, the American television host, who had stood in that formation as a young soldier and spent decades in broadcasting, without ever once mentioning publicly that a sergeant from Tennessee had kept him alive. Every one of them told the same story. Every one of them described the same man, calm, certain, not asking anyone's permission. Chris asked Tanner why he thought his father had never told anyone. Tanner thought about it. Then he said that when Edmonds told the commandant, "We are all Jews here," he wasn't bluffing. He wasn't buying time. He meant it. Those were his men. All of them. The answer wasn't complicated. From the moment your father said those words, Tanner told Chris, I decided that for the rest of my life I would always do the right thing, even if it was dangerous. In 2015, 70 years after Stalag WWII, the State of Israel recognized Roddie Edmonds at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial in Jerusalem, as righteous among the nations. Only the 5th American in history ever given that honor. In 2016, President Barack Obama awarded him the Medal of Honor posthumously at a White House ceremony. His son, Chris, accepted it. None of it happened while Roddie Edmonds was alive. He died on August 8, 1985. He was 65 years old, buried at Berry Highland Memorial Cemetery in Knoxville. His headstone doesn't mention Stalag WWII, or January 27th, or the 200 men who came home because of what he said. His diary, the one full of names and addresses, is preserved by his family. There is no entry for that morning. He didn't think it needed one. A pistol against his forehead. 1,200 men standing behind him in the snow. A commandant who expected him to break. And a sergeant from Tennessee who looked down the barrel of a gun in a frozen German camp and said the only thing he believed to be true. "We are all Jews here." And then went back to the barracks and never mentioned it to anyone for the rest of his life. If you've never heard of Roddie Edmonds before today, leave a comment below. And if you want more stories about the men of the greatest generation who did extraordinary things and never said a word about it, subscribe. There are more of them than you'd ever believe.